8 a.m. I'm glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. It's time for the Kickstarter discussion, and we shall be breaking down the Pamoja bid that led to Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania being named as hosts of the 2027 Africa Cup of Nations, the continental football showpiece that brings together the best on the continent to fight for that glory. Coming to Uganda, there's a lot that has gone on in the last 72 hours since that announcement was made. Some of it has bordered on extreme sentiment and cynicism on the part of the users of X, thus the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. However, some elements are saying that should be speaking to the powers that be about what ought to be done ahead of the great showpiece that Uganda now has the opportunity to sell itself to the world. I'm joined by Ismail Dhakaba Kigongo. He's head of sports at Nation Media Group, for perspective on what this means for us, but to also understand the dynamics of bidding. What does one have to do or have to promise in order to be declared as a host for any one tournament, from the World Cup, and now here we are, the Africa Cup of Nations. Perhaps it will help us understand why some facilities that may not be looking like they can host a game at Africa Cup of Nations level will actually host, or the ones that we completely are confident about might end up not hosting. Those are all dynamics that we shall be drawing on. It's a purple patch for the 2027 East African hosting rights. First and foremost, let me begin with asking you, when this news came through, it's pretty much something you've been following, being in the world of sports, but it must have triggered some kind of euphoria and excitement about the fact that we are part of the hosts for a continental showpiece.
Good morning, Chris. When the news actually filtered through on Wednesday, I'd been going around my day in a usual pattern.
Yeah.
Prepared to get the stories onto television, get the stories on the newspaper the next day. And my plan, like go around my day, was the routine. Then the story breaks. We had been following from Tuesday, but weren't really optimistic about Uganda's chances of winning the chance to host the AFCON. Then the story comes through, and then my phone starts to buzz. Everyone wants a bit of your opinion. Some want to confirm, some do not want to believe what they've seen on the internet. They'd rather hear you in voice. Then, of course, the news mill starts to take over.
That's right.
How many... my supervisor Tabo Tajira starts to call and ask how many stories can we get out of this, and that kind of thing. Eventually, my personal feeling was one of excitement, because I know what the Africa Cup of Nations can do for our country. That's right. Especially with infrastructure development, which has been one of the biggest setbacks or letdowns of Ugandan sport. The lack of sporting infrastructure is the one thing that comes up. However, the AFCON in itself will stretch beyond the benefits to sport. And that is one of the things that everyone should be looking at. But also, by the time it got into the late afternoon, evening, you and I were on X enjoying a lot of the banter and the cynicism, which for those in leadership,
it's very good feedback.
Yeah, some of them regard it as negativity, but I always like to say that cynicism is also one way of communicating.
That's right.
The same way satire is, and I really enjoyed it. Ugandans have a very, very, very good sense of humor.
Interesting.
They spent a bit of Wednesday going after everything that we lack. But some of those, I thought, if I was a leader, those were pointers of what we lack. Of course, there's a lot to do with the stadiums.
That's right.
There's a lot to do with our waterlogged channels and the potholes and the flooding in some areas of the city. And those for me stood out. If you do not like the way they are communicating, at least you'll get to understand the message. And I thought the message there on Wednesday was very clear-cut for those in leadership to understand.
No doubt. We shall be doing a dive into exactly what ought to be done ahead of 2027. But with regard to how the news came through, let's listen to Felix Manyindo, who covered that story for us. That's last evening.
AFCON 2027 is Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania, through the joint Pamoja bid, were yesterday declared winners of the rights to host the 2027 Africa Cup of Nations. The declaration also meant that the three countries automatically qualified for the AFCON finals as hosts. However, the work to ensure that the countries will be ready to host the championship starts now. It goes without saying that the three countries will need at least 6 stadia that meet CAF set standards. 2 of the stadia should have a seating capacity of at least 40,000 fans. 2 should have a capacity of at least 20,000 fans, and another 2 with a minimum capacity of 15,000 fans. Now, this means each of the 3 countries should produce 2 stadia. The Benjamin Mkapa National Stadium in Tanzania is the only facility recognized by CAF. This means Tanzania will need to upgrade only 1 more stadium to meet the CAF standards, while Kenya and Uganda must step up their efforts to raise the required 2 stadia before 2027. Kenya fronted the Nyayo National Stadium, Moi International Sports Center, both in Nairobi, and the Kipchoge Keino Stadium in Eldoret as the facilities to use, while Tanzania added the Azam Stadium to the Benjamin Mkapa Stadium in their bid. Uganda fronted the Mandela National Stadium in Nambole, while they propose a second stadium that will be constructed either in Lira or Hoima cities. With under 4 years to go to 2027, proper planning and investment in infrastructure will have to be undertaken by the 3 East African countries, which is not just restricted to road network, but railways, transport system and air transport will all have to be in place, given the vast distances between the host cities. Communication infrastructure and street lighting are also paramount. The hosts are also required to have 5-star hotels and a level 5 hospital with a special wing set aside for footballers and fans seeking treatment. The host countries will have to invest big to have all this in place. For example, Gabon invested $487 million to host the 2017 edition, while Egypt, who hosted the first ever 24-team tournament, spent nearly $291 million. Cameroon in 2021 invested over $877 million. Next year's competition in Ivory Coast is expected to cost an estimated $345 million. Whatever the budget is for Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania, it's expected that the amount will vary for individual countries depending on the amount of work that needs to be done. Felix Manyindo, NTV Sport.
All right, many thanks, Felix Manyindo, for that report that brings out the nature and the exactness of how the AFCON can be undertaken in terms of cost. Let me return to the studio, and we have Ismail Dhakaba Kigongo, the head of sports at Nation Media Group, helping us there. You spoke about the euphoria that followed the unveiling, but the bidding process is one that is not very clear. To the average or layman out here, we would assume for a country to qualify to host a tournament, you must demonstrate the ability to. But in the process of hearing the various experts and officials talk, I understood that it's actually what you say you're going to do in terms of planning. Tell us about the bidding process and what exactly we gave CAF for it to say, okay, I think these guys have what it takes, or will have what it takes by 2027.
Besides what you tell them that you're going to do, you must have guarantees from your government, because the host of the AFCON is the Football Association of the country. And after that, it's down to the FA president, in our case Moses Magogo, to sell this plan to President Museveni, and then President Museveni must sign off guarantees to the Confederation of African Football, CAF, for them to agree to have a tournament in a country. But you've got to go back to the beginning. In 2017, we had just returned from the Africa Cup of Nations, which Uganda had qualified for the first time in 39 years. So the FIFA president, Magogo, does call a press conference in Mengo. And I remember at that press conference is when he said that we are going to convince government to try and host the AFCON in 2025. He gave it an 8-year timeline. And I felt at the moment that Moses Magogo was just playing his politics. Because we had so many questions about how Uganda had performed at the AFCON in Gabon, including controversy within the team, where there were reports that the team were fighting for jerseys in the aftermath of the game against Mali, when FIFA asked them to return pieces of the jerseys they had used, and they wanted to take all of them. And then there was also a story about one of the players sneaking a woman into the camp. at the time when the team played in a city called Oyem in Gabon. And some of us sought answers from Moses Magogo. Then he throws a bombshell, which many of us at the time felt was a bit like a diversion. And we had to ask him repeatedly whether he actually meant what he said, and he insisted that he actually did. And that was 2017. Eventually, what has happened in that period is that Moses Magogo goes and finds goodwill with the Tanzania FA president and the Kenya FA president, and tells them, you guys, if we came together and sold this to our respective governments, we can host the AFCON. That's how it goes and convinces the Tanzania FA president. I think it's called Wallace Karia, and then Nick Mwendwa in Kenya. And all these are tasked to go and convince their respective presidents. At the time, I think Wallace Karia, who goes and convinces John Pombe Magufuli, the late, and then initially Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenyatta. And then that remains a government blueprint that is taken over by the governments that come in charge in William Ruto and Samia Suluhu. Then the three have to come together and put a bid, like where we are now, and that bid, like you state, is awarded on plans. You say we are going to do this. Of course, the times have changed.
That's right.
If this was 30 years ago, to be given the chance to host the AFCON, you've got to show that you have everything is available. And the AFCON is in such a way that we have a very short time span between the award of hosting rights to the tournament itself, because you're given only 4 years to prepare for the tournament. Of course, if this was the World Cup, you're given as many as 10 years. If you're going to host a World Cup like Qatar were back in last year, 2022,
I was just going to ask.
You're given 10 years. And we've learned from what Qatar did with the World Cup last year is that even they don't even have a football culture.
That is right.
Yeah, so they awarded the World Cup, which requires as many as 10 stadiums, and they actually offered FIFA to construct 12. But 10 was sufficient, because at the time when they awarded the World Cup, there are 2 stadiums.
Only two.
And they had 10 years to build 8, and eventually executed and got the 8. Of course, when a country like, for example, the USA is awarded the World Cup in the sense that they are going to host the next edition in 2026, they don't need to build any new stadium, neither a train or an airport. All they have to do is to secure these places for that particular tournament. If tomorrow England awarded the rights to host the World Cup, they don't need to build any new stadium. Neither an airport, not a hotel, nothing. But for certain other countries, because FIFA has seen, and CAF has followed that, is that you've got to be more inclusive in the way sport is run, because the world has become more inclusive. If the old system of 30-40 years ago was being used, then countries like Uganda, countries like Korea, Japan, countries like Qatar would never have a chance of hosting. And for me, this also feeds into the kind of narrative I've had with the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, who was the start of that clip by Felix.
That's right.
He has previously said that if the AFCON was just to be awarded to countries that are able to host the AFCON today, only 6 African countries would have a chance to host it.
Egypt,
Morocco,
South Africa,
Algeria, then he mentioned Ghana. Because they have their stadiums already. So
Nigeria couldn't.
Nigeria could. They have the stadiums and they have the hotels. Maybe they might need just to improve their rail lines, and those are things. If they have rail lines, because that's one of the challenges. So in a way of having the world more inclusive, and this is a region, the attraction I think for me that stands out with East Africa, this is the only region that has never hosted.
Yeah, sure.
North Africa has, West Africa has, Southern Africa has. The last time the AFCON was played anywhere close to East Africa was back in 1957. And that was the first edition of the AFCON, and it was played in Sudan. And only had 3 countries. And you can imagine what the world was in 1957 to today.
Oh my God.
So you could almost argue East Africa has never hosted. So the only way you're going to bring East Africa on board, if you're CAF, is by handing it the opportunity. Because the bid that East Africa had would not, for example, see the light of day against a country like Algeria, against a country like Nigeria.
Yeah, of course, there was
the appeal is going
Nigeria and Benin. There was also some stiff competition from Senegal, Egypt, as well as Botswana. But allow me go back to something you said in the initial stages of coming up with this Pamoja bid. It was a brainchild of Magogo.
Yes, it was.
In other words, Tanzania and Kenya were not in it.
They are co-opted.
Okay.
Yeah. What I think Uganda and at this point I think we need to discuss it as Uganda, not Magogo, because not Magogo. Yeah. what we have done is to sell what I would call a selfish or personal interest and make it a national interest and eventually make it a regional interest. Because I would imagine for a country like Kenya, whose hands were already burnt. Remember, they beat host the AFCON in 1996. And before that, they had won a right to host the All Africa Games in 1987 and were not able to host either. The enthusiasm has not been there.
It hasn't been there at all.
Even in the time under Uhuru Kenyatta, when they've tried to host big events, they brought back the Kenya Safari Rally, which I've seen the Kenyans argue that the only reason they can host that is because all it needs is bad roads, and they have those in plenty.
That was a bit brutal, but...
And Uhuru Kenyatta has also been able to bring 2 European PGA Tour events to Nairobi, and that has helped. But they were never really enthusiastic about having this tournament come to them, and Tanzania perhaps were not even there. So what we have done as Uganda is that what was a personal endeavor and a selfish interest of an individual, in the FA President Moses Magogo, has now got to become a national interest.
What that says about initiatives by any one individual who holds office is that people have got to be given the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. And there is a benefit of doubt, but there's also what you give them to buy in. What have we as Uganda, what has the FA President given the other regions to find this a viable option? Because you've seen from what Felix presented there that the cost is obscene.
It's
because Cameroon, that hosted the last AFCON, spent in excess of $880 million to host that tournament.
Oh my God.
880, which is the equivalent of 3 trillion Uganda shillings. Now 3 trillion Uganda shillings is the entire roads budget for year, is the entire education budget for year, is the entire health budget for the year, and perhaps this is less than what we spend on our defense, on our Minister of Defense expenditure. So how then do you sell all these countries to raise maybe at least 1 trillion Uganda shillings for a tournament that is going to happen in a month? And for so many of the people, they may not understand the benefits of the AFCON beyond what is going to happen during that month. Yet the benefits for me supersede that just before and thereafter. And we're a country that has always sold ourselves as coffee, the fish in the lakes and everything. What tournaments like this do is that their target is mainly on the human resource. Because the number of people, for example, you would need just to work as volunteers for an AFCON is obscene. Look at construction and hotel and everything.
Allow me to hold you in your tracks. You'll be telling us a little bit more about the benefits that we shall need to understand, because I know there are some people who have already taken positions in as far as businesses and hotels are concerned. But allow us welcome Mark Namanya to the program. A very good morning, Mr. Namanya.
Morning.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Pretty good. Now, we are very excited, no doubt, and I'm sure you are, the fact that we shall be co-hosting the AFCON in 2027. Mr. Ismail Dhakaba has threshed out pretty much the initial aspects of how this bid came about, how we ended up being in this trio. Your take on this landmark decision by CAF and what Uganda stands to benefit, especially with regard to football in terms of reputation, because at the end of the day we are there, we've won a few tournaments and we are respected when we play or line up against teams, but this one is supposed to reinforce our legacy and reputation.
First and foremost, thank you for hosting me. This tournament would not have come to East Africa without the role of the Speaker of Parliament. She's been at the fore of this bid, and it's been well documented. Even actually, the words of the CAF President Patrice Motsepe, he told the FA President, Engineer Moses Magogo, that without your wife, it was going to be a challenge for this bid to go through. So she's been at the fore of it.
Okay.
Of course, together with the head of state and the first lady. So there's been a lot of work for this bid
and
to
I think it's
succeed.
Okay for government officials or anybody who holds office.
The thing
every resource
yeah, because you cannot win a bid.
Yeah.
Of any kind without the input of your government. Qatar would never have hosted the World Cup without the Qatar government being fully in. Russia was never going to win the 2018 World Cup without Vladimir Putin. It's a no-brainer. So without the support of the government of Uganda, without parliament, without just about each and every important stakeholder in your country, you have no chance of winning it. So now for a three-country bid, it was even more demanding because you had to buy in all the three governments and make them think alike for you to table a very convincing bid to secure the big tournament. It will be the biggest tournament by a country Uganda has ever hosted in terms of sports, and it's historic in that sense. So despite the fact that we are hosting it together with our West African neighbors, Kenya and Tanzania, it will be by far the biggest sports event this country has ever hosted.
No doubt.
So
the dividends will be enormous.
Absolutely. The air traffic, the foreign exchange, just about each and every Ugandan is going to tap into the AFCON, which started from the day we won the bid. So it's not just 2027, it's just 1 month. No. It's going to, and then they're going to be legacy projects. So while we're looking at AFCON, that 1 month of AFCON, they're going to be legacy projects. They're going to outlive the 1 month of the tournament. So that is one thing which happens for every country which hosts the tournament. I remember in 2018, I was in the Commonwealth Games in Australia, and the Games Village was being held in a certain new structure which was converted into hostels for a university which had just been constructed in that area in Gold Coast. So same thing with Stratford in the Stratford Olympic Park in East London during the 2022 World Cup. So there's some projects which outlive that tournament which you're hosting, be it Olympics, be it World Cup, and I think for Uganda, for Kenya, for Tanzania, that's the biggest and most positive news to have happened in a very, very long time.
Okay. Let me stick with you, Mark, on the aspect of how much political capital there is in this, and the impetus that it created, that the Speaker and the President were part and parcel of this. Dhakaba spoke about the fact that 8 years ago, as many as 8 years ago, that is when the idea came up that we need to be able to host this, especially with regard to what Magogo would say once, time and again. But if
and of course at the time, sorry to cut you short, at the time, remember that idea, Ismail, was born out of the frustration of Uganda not qualifying for AFCON. And in those 37, 38 years, we had countries which had poor economies than Uganda, countries which didn't have the kind of strength that Uganda has, the Burkina Fasos of this world, all hosting AFCON. And you imagined, I mean, if they can do it, why can't we do it? We are a better country with better weather, with better tourism attractions. At the time, we just didn't have the government buy-in. And without it, you cannot table any bid of any kind.
And that is where I was coming, government buy-in. Over the last 4 years, President Yoweri Museveni's tone with regard to sports has not been anything to write home about. And this is a gentleman who knew and was being quoted. He could have perhaps ensured that his tone was more positive regarding sports, but his Emmys are no slant. Was he waiting for clarity or certainty so that he can fully back the endeavor?
I think it's been a chain of events which have gone a long way in changing the mindset of the head of state, because for a long time sports was given a very, very backseat, you know, in the sphere of national priorities. But a couple of things have happened which are not related, you know, starting with the emergence of the athletes in the East. Moses Kipsiro, Boniface Kiprop, and then you had that double gold by Stephen Kiprotich, 2012, 2013. And at the time, sports started taking center stage, you know, in the national issues, you know. And then you had the emergence, obviously, of the Shikrens, and then the Speaker of Parliament at the time, Rebecca Kadaga, and this being girls. And I think there's been a series of unrelated events which have
worked for the good
of sports.
Yeah. And I don't know why Mark is avoiding to throw in the part of emergence of a big youth population. We've always been a very youthful country for a very long time. But now you have a very big youth population, and the people talking to the president are telling him, when he asks them what the youth are doing,
that's right,
they are telling him they are in music, they are in sport, because that's what the youth love to do. And unless you're a damn leader, you'd be, or you want to leave power tomorrow,
which President Museveni is not.
Yeah.
but also principally, you also cannot.
You guys don't worry yourself.
You also cannot disregard the role of Moses Magogo in this, because for a long time it's been his position, his desire to tell the government that there's nothing that can transform society like sports. Sports is a billion-dollar industry.
That's right.
And that is the message he's been sending across. He started having a couple of series with a couple of meetings with the head of state. And then, of course, also the role of the speaker cannot be disregarded in terms of telling Muzei that sports can transform society. Sports can cause a positive change, you know, the kind of change that we are desiring as a nation, as well as the First Lady and all the people around the head of state, because all of a sudden, the one thing which unites this country is sports. It's non-partisan.
We speak it's very
absolutely,
you know, solid single language every time you see the Uganda flag.
Yeah.
And there's somebody winning gold.
There's no blue, there's no red, there's no yellow. It's just Uganda.
All right. Now, gentlemen, I would like to transition into something that Ugandans need to understand, the economics of this, the tournament itself. Dhakaba spoke about the fact that Cameroon used a staggering $800 million. $880 million to, you know, to put the whole tournament together. We are, of course, going to do a trio, so Tanzania will do its part. But for Uganda's part, what's the economics? How much money do we need specifically, and what is it going to do? How is it going to be, you know, strewn around?
If you do $880 million divided by 3, Uganda would be investing at least 1 trillion Uganda shillings in that period. The one thing I think that stands out is infrastructure, sports infrastructure. Because to host an AFCON, you need 6 stadiums. Of course, that would be 2 per country.
2 per country, yeah.
One of them must be a 40,000 seater, and then the other can be 20,000. That's the first thing that comes to light. Then thereafter, the AFCON in itself does not really stop with what happens inside the 4 lines, inside the stadium. What we see on television is that to get to these stadiums, you have to put in place the kind of infrastructure that enables people access those venues. That's the first thing that stands out. Then there has got to be a deliberate investment in hotels.
Yeah.
When FIFA was submitting their bid, they did quote Serena and Sheraton as the 2 hotels that would be available for the tournament. By the look of things, it may demand that there is a third 5-star hotel outside of Kampala.
Somebody should buy a year pretty early and then redo the works.
Yeah, because in that bid document, FIFA also did make a commitment to CAF to build a stadium either in Lira or in Hoima. In one of those places.
I think the dice falls on Hoima.
Because of the airport, because of a new airport, maybe they have an advantage, an international airport. And there are things that CAF are going to demand However, when they demand the things with air transport, with rail lines, because the tournament stretches beyond the 24 teams who come maybe with a contingent of 60 people, it's about the movement of funds.
That's right.
And their security of these funds. And then there is access to a level 5 hospital, which Mulago is. But also, even during the tournament,
how many level 5 hospitals?
There is only one in Uganda. You need one.
Okay.
You need one level 5 hospital. But even that level 5 hospital, CAF will demand that one of the wings is dedicated to just AFCON, which is for the fans that are visiting, and the teams, and the players, and the officials if they need that kind of medical during the tournament. So we may have to shut down a bit of Mulago for that particular period, even with all its challenges. Those are the major things. Maybe for me, the one thing that stands out from this bid that we may lack at this point is the transport, because our country is largely moving from one place to the other by road. And there's been promises with the rail system for a very long time. Maybe this is an opportunity. We have 27 months, to be precise, to be able to put something in place, because the final decision and the confirmation that the AFCON is coming here will be made somewhere in January 2026, because CAF gives themselves 1 year to the tournament to confirm where the tournament is going to be. So we have 27 months to sort out some of these things. Maybe the rail line will not be done, but at least we are very sure the airport will be done. And let's not fear that for Mark, who has traveled everywhere in the world, that the airport we need here is the one you found in Barcelona or the one you found in Turkey. The airport we actually need is the one we found in Oyem. Or the one we found in Mogomo in Equatorial Guinea. That's the type of airport we need. They are not very big, but they're able to land a Bombardier, which is a 70-seater aircraft, and take off. And from what I've seen in places like Soroti, Narua, these airfields are there. And just need a minor upgrade and maybe a better control tower, and then that is it. So it's not nuclear science we are talking about here.
All right, your take?
I think the one thing that this successful bid, the one opportunity that stands out for Uganda is that finally we have a chance to take an economic spinning project out of Kampala. Because you've talked about Sheraton and Serena, which are a stone throw away from one another. You've talked about Mulago.
Actually, two Serenas.
Yeah, two Serenas, a lot of you. Now, you mentioned Gabon. Remember, there was Franceville, there was Port Gentil, where Uganda Cranes was based. There was Libreville.
And then there were 4 airports.
And they were in the different parts of the country. Or in Cairo. Ismail, remember, there was Cairo, of course. There was Alexandria. Teams were in Ismailia. There was... So, what this AFCON does, I want to think, is, I know there is a certain faction which is leaning towards construction of the stadium in Lira, the John Akibwa Stadium. If, for instance, they want to go ahead with John Akibwa or Hoima or whatever, at least finally you have an device around which you can grow an economy, and there are spin-offs for all the people around that society who are living in a far-flung place from Kampala, because Kampala is suffocating on its own weight. You have the main university here, you have Mulago here, you have all the government institutions here, you have State House here, you have Parliament here, you have... And that traffic that we suffer with is because everything has been Kampalanized. So AFCON gives us a chance to actually take...
That's a new one.
Absolutely.
Kampalanized.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a lot, of course, that's going to be done, but it also opens up what could be an ugly window for politics. Where does it go to Lira? Does it go to Hoima? And in that process, I see the possibility of dragging ourselves down. How best? What are the safeguards against that?
Maybe that is only taken on in plot 1 in NTV, where it goes. Because when you're a leader, you've got to Ugandanize the solution. You've got to convince us that eventually, whether it's in Lira or in Hoima, it's in Uganda.
It's in Uganda.
That's the first thing, because 100 years from now, the projects that we might manage to do during this AFCON will be here, will all not be here.
That's right.
Even the people in plot 1 will not be here. So you've got to make this a Ugandan thing. And the thing is that the president, in the times when he's been on the road campaigning, and he's going to be seeking a mandate, I would imagine, in a few years,
we shall be hearing a lot of AFCON. We shall be hearing a lot of AFCON.
In the places where he's been, and I've seen him promise a stadium in Lira. I've seen him promise a stadium in Fort Poto to redo Buhinga. Of course, if you've been to Buhinga, it's so narrow to build a stadium of the magnitude of the AFCON. He has never promised a stadium in Hoima, but I also know that while he wasn't, when the airport was coming up, FUFA did seek, I think, land with one of the families, one of the players who played for Uganda, I think in the 1950s and 60s, did offer FUFA land in excess of 25 acres of land to build something as a legacy project by his family.
International has that land.
Yeah, exactly, in that place. And FUFA have always wanted to, and you know when, and you know, you've got to do these things understanding the forward and backward linkages. I think the moment when FUFA learned of the airport coming up in Hoima, they took up the offer and they were given a lease agreement, I think, which is 49 years first. And initially, if they start doing something in the 49 years, then the extension is guaranteed for 99 years.
That's right.
Now, those are the kind of things that you've got to look at.
One thing I'll say is, it was very, very hard to win this bid as Pamoja East Africa. The hardest bid is going to be execution. Pulling it off. Because there have been precedents. In 1996, Kenya won AFCON. They were given the right to host AFCON, and then they lost South Africa because they were not ready. A couple of years ago, 2018, Kenya was supposed to host CHAN. They lost the rights to, eventually they were CAF withdrew the hosting rights and gave them to Morocco. Suddenly there are some certain countries out there which will host AFCON tomorrow. Morocco will host AFCON tomorrow, even today. They have everything. They don't have to start building roads and hospitals.
So for the sake of Kenya, it could be a jinx.
So the point for all three countries, the point I'm making is that for all three countries, one, they've got to be at the same wavelength. I know Uganda is we're in control of what's happening within our borders. I don't know how much control we'll have when what's happening in Tanzania and Kenya, but I know that there's been constant communication and there are buy-ins from both governments. President Ruto, President Suluhu and President Museveni, they've been talking. But more critically for Uganda, we've had precedents of all these Chogam disasters. We've had these people who are...
Northern bypass, the most expensive road in the world.
So it's going to be very, very critical that we have the right people in the right places, and we have people who are delivering on what they have to do, because there's no time.
There isn't.
2023 is done. In essence, we have 3 years, 2027. So the suppliers, the tenders, and it is everything, the procurement processes have got to be done. They've got to go to the right people, precisely. Because if we start messing around with this project, then we shall be our worst enemies. And like I said, winning it was a good thing. It was a hard bid. The hardest bid is going to ensure that everything that we've promised in this bid comes to fulfillment.
All right, let me ask you something briefly. Who is responsible rather for the opening game? Who is going to host the final? Those are all discussions that should be ongoing.
Ordinarily, this is also a new territory for CAF. All tournaments that have happened before have happened in 2 countries, so it's very easy to award one country the opening ceremony and the other and the closing. So this is new territory to have 3 countries host a single tournament. That decision, I think, is far from being agreed. Not even the dates of the tournament have been penciled in, because that will also be done in due course after the format of the qualifiers is done. Because even having 3 countries also changes the qualification format, because now CAF is giving 3 slots to the host to qualify for the, which would ordinarily be 2. So there's a lot of water that must go under the bridge for us to get there. But in the end,
I'm happy. We are there.
My hunch, Ismail is beating about the bush. My hunch is that the final of AFCON 2027 will be hosted at the Benjamin Mkapa Stadium
in Tanzania.
In Tanzania,
the opening,
because
it's 60,000.
It's the biggest stadium
in the region.
In the region, I don't think Uganda is going to build a 60,000 seater between now and 2027. Nambola is 40,000 seater. So if you ask me to take a wild guess, I think the opening game will probably be in Uganda. The final will be in Tanzania. I could be wrong, but that's my suspicion.
Interesting there. So we shall go down on our knees and pray, especially for the opening ceremony. That is always the one that ushers in the world what's going to happen. And Uganda should be able to sell the best of
there is a lot to sell, and for me that's one thing that excites me, that the places I've been to, there are not many places as unique as East Africa and Uganda in particular.
That's right.
Because I've been to economies that are bigger than Uganda, but there is nowhere else they party like Uganda. And for me, we should not think about selling the AFCON as what happens between one goal and the other goal, between 22 sweating men.
That's right.
We should sell the AFCON with the everything else that you'll find in Uganda.
Football in the AFCON will be 11%. The other 89% is all the non-football things.
Interesting.
I remember when OEM, if the FIFA president is listening, we were somewhere in a very, very dingy place in OEM. OEM is a very, very backward town in Gabon.
Yeah.
And that's why Uganda played Mali. Uganda's third group game, that 1-1 draw where Mia scored a spectacular goal. And Engineer Moses Magogo said, but man, football is a very, very unique product. How on earth would we be in such a place anywhere in the world? Because in Uganda, I cannot be in such a place. But football, because of football, I'm in the most dingy place in OEM. If CAF ever brought AFCON to Uganda, they'll never remove it. They'll probably be giving Uganda hosting rates after every 10 to 15 years, because the kind of party atmosphere in Uganda is incomparable.
That's right.
And believe you me, they'll definitely enjoy the nightlife in Uganda.
All right, no doubt. Those are the peripheral aspects, but of course, it's something that we can be able to use to the best of our advantage. Now, let's talk the football itself. How does Uganda come off as this nation that not only hosting, but actually stands a chance at good performance at the AFCON? What is being done right now? Does it have to be realigning football clubs to produce more talent? What is
first and foremost,
pipeline like?
Right now, the national team is at its lowest ebb because the peak years of the last generation are all over. The generation which had Dennis Onyango, who's retired, which had the Tony Mawejes, who are all retired. Even the Farouk Mias and Isaac Mulemez, they've been trying to cross-generate them with the current generation, but clearly, right now the national team needs a serious rebuild because we've had, I think, back-to-back failures in qualification for AFCON. There is a World Cup qualification campaign coming up. No one in his right state of mind thinks Uganda is going to mount any bid to qualify for the 2026 World Cup with Algeria in the group. So, and there's no coach as we speak right now. So football is back to the drawing board, and I think AFCON 2027, I do think, comes quite early for this rebuild. It's going to be some time before we can build the sort of team that took us to Gabon 2027 in terms of experience, in terms of depth, in terms of all-round options. So I think, again, 2027 is, as far as I'm concerned, 3 years away from now, because this year is done, because we're in October. I don't think Uganda is going to quite, again, I could be wrong, I'm not a soothsayer, but I think in 3 years' time, given the kind of talent right now, we don't even have a coach. We're still scouting for a coach. AFCON 27 comes quite too fast for us to have the sort of team which is going to compete up to into the latter stages of the competition.
What's the contingency plan?
Many a time, it's always said that to have a successful tournament, you need the host to do well, at least get out of the group stages. And that's a bare minimum that Uganda Cranes will be demanded of. In the position that the FUFA or the FA president is in, maybe the preparations of a team start today before you even throw a first brick in Arua or Hoima or wherever you want to throw it.
That's right.
I would love a stadium to actually be in Bugweri, for example. I'll then go there and say I campaigned on NTV to bring the stadium here, and maybe that will get me a vote.
Interesting.
Eventually, but the rebuild of a team, and football is a very thankless sport, the manner in which teams are built or structures are set up, that you might have a system, a conveyor belt that brings players, and in 30 years you might bring out only maybe 5 excellent players because the others will go to waste, and you have to keep investing. Now, without that kind of time, I think the most urgent thing today, if I'm in the FA president's office, is to put in place a coaching team. Let's say 5, and then puts a group of players, a core group of players into a structure, knowing that these are the players. Of course, some will pop up, and most of these we know. We know there's been a deliberate effort on people like Kenneth Semakula, Fahad Bayo. Those are the players who are likely to be there.
Alpha Sali is also promising. He wants to play football.
Sure, he has been to the AFCON with the under-20 team. Yeah. So you've got to have that core group of players. But that also, for me, is down to coaching. Then you hope that there won't be disaster striking the team between now and 2027. Get into there. We've all seen goals scored by the crowd. If you have a crowd inside Namboli, it's actually very, very possible for the crowd to push the team to get an edge over the opposition. But like Mark stated, it's a very difficult situation that we find ourselves with the Uganda Cranes per se, because many a time when the people in the FA have argued about the good things that they've done for football, especially the marketing, the revenue streams, and the improvements that have happened. What hasn't improved is the product within the four lines, which is the most important thing. And the work on that product within the four lines has got to start today. Before you even think about procurement and red tape and the president speaking to a construction firm in China or in Turkey or wherever, the football in the four lines has got to start getting worked on today.
Because this, I remember, FOFA's promise.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, FOFA's promise was that they were building a team to qualify for the 2026 World Cup. I do not think that took off. That took off, and 2027 falls just 1 year after 2026, and clearly right now we haven't qualified since 2019, where we qualified with, I think that those were the final stages of the team which took us to Gabon 2027. Now, can we build a team in the next 3 years when that team which took us to Gabon 2027 had been built over, I think, 10 or so years? So it's going to be quite a challenge for us to mount a team to take us to the quarterfinals of 2027 AFCON. I hope I'm wrong. I'll be pleasantly happy to be wrong, but if you ask me to put my money on Uganda reaching the quarterfinals of 2027 AFCON, I would not put there a penny.
Gentlemen, thank you for what is no doubt a very candid submission and a perspective with regard to our chances, but most importantly, breaking down these matters for some of us who might be outside the realm of sports. Mark Namanya, many thanks, and many thanks to you too, Ismail Dhakaba Kigongo. That will do it for the Kickstarter. I hope you are emboldened in terms of information with regard to Uganda's chances, but most importantly, the prospects that the 2027 AFCON does present for the economy. We'll be right back.